So first question, two-part question here. How has the pandemic changed digitization and the relationship between the client and accountant? And in your experience, has the last couple of years brought to light further changes that you might want to explore with your software?
Thank you. Would have been nice to get that question in advance, but that's okay. Obviously, I'm out of it. It's late
I
in the
also
day.
thought we had sent the questions out.
You probably did. You probably did. Yeah, the big thing for our software, which is happening with the whole pandemic and the way people are doing business. Prior to it, there was face-to-face meetings. Those aren't happening very often anymore. I don't think it's going to go back to 4 meetings a year. I think it's going to be a combo. People are getting comfortable, again, with the technology, so it's working well. And where in a meeting face-to-face is different. You don't have to be as prepared. You can have handouts. You're looking them in the eye. You gotta have more interaction. You gotta have more creativity when you're doing it over the computer. And so the beauty with Wellman, what a lot of advisors have done, it's a live meeting. The client, they're talking to them. The client makes a comment about their estate plan. They type it right on the screen with them. So it's more interaction. It's more, keeps everybody awake.
Thanks, Rick. Okay, next question for Sean. When it comes to beginning the process of looking into outsourcing as a possible staffing shortage solution, have you heard concerns from current staff? And how do you address those internally?
Definitely, we used to hear about that. If you look back kind of when outsourcing started 12 years ago, there was always kind of a concern, is this going to impact my job? Are they going to be reducing headcount onshore? I think with today's environment and all the press on my slides, you might remember those headlines. I think the people now realize that there's not a real concern for them losing their job. And actually they're welcoming the help because they're under so much pressure in doing the work that we spoke about earlier. So.
Thank you. Next question is for Paul. So for some time, there's been fee pressure with the introduction of low-cost providers. Has this been a topic that's come up with your clients?
It has been talked about in the industry for a long time. The only time the fee issue comes up is at the beginning of a relationship, okay? And I believe that if you show somebody that you're different, that it's not really head-to-head competition, because they're usually looking at the competition from what am I paying for investment management, whereas you're comparing that to what are you paying for a whole slate of services. So discounting of fees is pretty rare. And what I would say is, as the assets go up, the percentage on assets go down. Mm-hmm. So it's already scaled. We haven't seen that. There certainly was a fear of that when the robo-advisor thing was going on. Everybody's talking about robo-advisors, but frankly, I don't know whether any of them are still in business.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, next question is for Trevor. You mentioned there are a few options once the client reaches age 71 in relation to the IPP. How do you suggest the accountant start the conversation with clients about this transition?
It all comes down to really what's going to happen to the corporation post-retirement. If with the changes to Ontario, you can keep the plan going. Pramod would probably be able to tell us more as to what the calculations will be like on a plan wind up. But it's with interest rates going up, it's likely the tax hit if they decide to turn the damn thing off is going to be less. So really it's a continuity issue. If they're going to continue in business, if it's getting rolled down to the next generation, it's more than likely the plan is going to stay intact. Annuitization I just don't see very often. As I said, you really have to have other assets. Right? You don't want to sink all of your you put all your marbles in one thing. But it's case by case. You still get people wanting to wind up the plan, but less and less, because they don't see the benefit of taking a very large tax hit and giving up the benefit they got at the beginning.
Thanks, Trevor. Next question is for Bruno. Can you give us an example of how you helped a client think outside of the box? What were the direct and indirect results of this, and how did Wealth Stewards play a role in this?
Okay, I'm just trying to think of a few examples. I may have to give more than one. The most prominent one I can give you is one from a few years ago. And I'll give you maybe a couple of quick ones that have been more recent as examples as well. But the most prominent one that I could give you was a client that I used to have that was a relatively new client. After a couple of years, we had a discussion about his investment portfolios, and he had 6 brokers. 6. I sort of indicated to him that that was too many, and each one of them was operating independently without any coordination. At the end of the day, without going through all the detail in the interest of time, I had indicated to him that he had to go down to 3, and he should get one of them, or someone has to coordinate all this stuff and give him cohesive, comprehensive, integrated advice on an ongoing basis. What happened was he did get rid of 3 brokers, and he added a 4th, which was Wealth Stewards. I refer them to Wealth Stewards because Wealth Stewards was able to actually and was willing to coordinate with the remaining 3 brokers and give the client comprehensive analysis of where all their money was going, where that wasn't being done before. So Wealth Stewards was doing something. None of the other brokers were prepared to do that. So it's in line with what Wealth Stewards has done in the past and continues to do in terms of tailoring their services and requirements to the specific client needs. And they got a fairly large client as a result of that and continue to have that client. In fact, I think that client has continued to divert more of their overall portfolio to Wealth Stewards. I was going to say by coincidence, but that client ended up being a beneficiary of a very large estate afterwards, and that money was distributed among the 4 brokers as well. So that's one example. Some that are sort of unusual but more recent. I had a client I was doing advisory work for recently that was negotiating a line of credit with a bank in May. To this day, it still hasn't been finalized, and this bank has been with that company for about 20 years. They were redeeming some shares, and they were 9 days away from the deadline where they had to redeem these shares, without going into the details as to why. 9 days before, I said, "Are you going to get the money or not?" And they still looked at me like a deer in the headlights, and they couldn't guarantee they're going to have the money. Within 7 days of that day, Wealth Stewards was able to facilitate a loan for, well, I'll give you some details, for 6 months for 10%. And that happened within 7 days. And when I say 7 days, that included a weekend, so 5 days, when the money was actually in their hands. Another one that happened recently was a large manufacturer of kitchens, vanities, etc. They were growing, they had supply chain issues, and they needed to finance some working capital, inventory, etc. The client said, "Well, I have financing contacts." So long story short, their contact was going to probably spend 3 months putting together a financial reporting package that they were going to then troll throughout all their financing contacts in the bank. I indicated, listen, you need the money now. You're lucky if you're going to get the money in 12 months going down that route. Again, 10 days later, Wealth Stewards had the money in their bank account. And then 4 or 5 months after that, Wealth Stewards again enhanced additional funding that they needed. And that happened probably within 2 weeks of that phone call. When we're talking about alternative investments and things like that, Wealth Stewards is able to do that because they have a lean decision-making structure. They understand these businesses, and some of these are from clients, and they're able to turn this around by identifying potential clients that they have and diverting some of their funds into these alternative investments. I'm going to stop because I'm probably taking up too much time, but I'm going to continue.
Thanks, Bruno. Next question again for Rick. What has the feedback been from the end client on the digitization of the wealth management experience? That's your last question, and you can
Okay,
relax.
thank you. Yeah, the feedback has been, the power of Element, it automates a lot of processes that sometimes as humans, we drop steps if we're too busy and stuff. So the two big things is that they like the picture of the wealth dashboard. They like having an idea of where they're at. So that, even though an advisor's doing a great job and, they might have it at 75%, sometimes you have to see that. I think that's really the primary one. And I guess the advisor in some ways is more organized because they're more systematic at attacking it, so they're not overloading them with 9 topics in one meeting. So I think those two things are ones that would jump out.
Thanks, Rick. Next question for Sean. Thanks for passing the mic around. Are you able to share some success stories from Canadian CPAs who have implemented outsourcing, and how do you see the world of accounting evolving over the next, let's say, 5 years?
Sure. For the first question, so a success story that I'd like to share is a small firm, probably around, I think it was around 6 people in that firm, took on a junior resource to just do compilation engagements. It went really successful. They started at the start of the year. As they moved into the personal tax season, that person shifted over to that work, and they actually brought on another person at that stage as well because it was going so well. That allowed a lot of that personal tax returns to be prepared during that time, where people on their team, the more professional and more senior people, used to be dragged into that just due to the size of their firm, and really allowed them to have a lot of the conversations that we were talking about before about wealth management and things, more value-added conversations because they weren't as well involved in the detail. That progressed throughout that year, going back to corporate work and doing compilations, and the next year they had 5 people. So a real success story that way. Second phase of your question there, where is the accounting firms going in 5 years? I think you're going to see a lot more technology and automation for sure. There's lots of tools out there that are coming, but I don't think you're ever going to, I guess in your world, the robo investor, I don't think we're ever going to see the robo auditor or the robo tax advisor. And I think there's going to be a lot of continued demand for the services. And I think the supply, just looking at the demographics and the entrance into universities, into the profession, is shrinking. So there's going to be that continual pressure on finding people and talent.
And a final question for you, Sean. How will outsourcing impact succession planning?
So I think succession planning for accounting firms, and there's a lot of transition of accounting firms, as a lot of people in this room would know right now. And I think the valuations of that practice is impacted by the staffing that you have and the access to staffing. There's firms that are buying firms for talent and staff. And then there's firms that are selling that don't have, because they don't have staff, and their pricing on that is a result of that. So I think outsourcing, if you have the right players involved and you have people to deliver your services, your succession or your valuation on succession is a lot better as a result of that.
Thank you. All right, next question is for Trevor. What are some traits in a client that a CPA can look out for when identifying which clients might have a need for an IPP or not an RCA?
Well, I think it goes to any tax planning. What's their real appreciation of risk and what their appreciation of long-term thinking is. The worst kind of client is the one that wants an immediate tax relief, doesn't think down the road, and then they're back next year for the next thing. They're just setting themselves up for audit risk. IPPs are fairly simple. They fit in, as I said, really 2 buy boxes. One is tax relief in expectation of selling, so entrepreneurial situation. The other is you're helping, it's more planning. It's our professional corp, or for whatever reason they have trouble spending. You're going to introduce something that will create discipline. It will create a result. And that's it.
Thank you. Next question is for Bruno. Thanks for asking, Mike. You've been working with Well Steward as an affiliate for a number of years now. When you consider referring a client, how do you initially approach that conversation?
Okay. With respect to approaching the conversation, I have to back up a step. Part of it depends on your relationship with those clients or prospects. Some of them are not all clients. Some of them are professional relationships. Some are personal relationships. But at the end of the day, they have to be able to have high confidence and trust in you. If you don't have that, then obviously it's much more difficult to encourage them to go to a better service provider like Well Stewards. Part of that is I suggest to people that they have to be able to identify opportunities. And in terms of identifying opportunities, without getting into the detail, they tend to happen on a variety of trigger points. Again, is there a sale of a business? Is there a purchase of a business? Is there a death, a disability, a marriage, children, a divorce, weddings, whatever they are in life? Any life change tends to trigger an opportunity. Having said that, if the practitioner is not engaged in identifying or anticipating some of this stuff over time, then they will miss those opportunities. But once you do have that opportunity, in order to make a referral, there's a bit of a continuum. Someone can have a situation where they can say, well, speak to Well Stewards because I think they can help you in this way or that way, and just leave it at that. I don't think that's going to end up in a high success rate for your client in terms of making that transition. My experience has been once the opportunity is identified, you have to take it further. You have to arrange to provide them information and background. Maybe your experience with Well Stewards, with other clients, and what's happened in those particular circumstances. Have a meeting with Well Stewards and attend the meeting. In fact, most of those meetings that I have attended in the past, probably to Paul's and Haley's and other people's chagrin, I probably spent 70% of the time speaking in that meeting, as opposed to having them speak, because part of it is to engage the client in terms of understanding and trusting and looking at it from an external standpoint in terms of what the value proposition is for that particular client, and why it makes sense for them to consider moving, or at least assessing whether to move or not. There's other dynamics as well in there, but I would say that a successful transition also means that the practitioner or affiliate needs to have an ongoing relationship with Well Stewards in helping to provide suggestions to them with respect to that client, or situational changes or other information. And Well Stewards also is obliged to do the same thing in reverse. So I'll often get a request for some information, or Well Stewards saying, well, we're thinking of doing this or that, what do you think? And they'll get an opinion from me or whoever else they're engaging. So if you engage in those types of activities, as a rule, you tend to experience a higher success rate, and your client will be much more satisfied as well with that transition. I was speaking to Mark, who's at the back of the room earlier, and I did say to him that I haven't had a regret from any client that I have referred, or prospect, or professional affiliate. In fact, some of them actually thanked me for doing it. One guy said it was the best thing I ever did for him, which is I said, really? I said, I find that hard to believe, but that's what he said. I'm not sure. I'll stop there unless you want me to elaborate.
Can I just pick up on one point that Bruno made? And so by explaining and saying from his perspective why this is different, that's very meaningful, because he's the trusted advisor at the onset of that. So just saying, here's a name, or go and call so-and-so, there isn't the transference of trust. And let's be honest, I mean, if you don't believe in who you're referring to, don't make the referral. That doesn't make any sense. I don't care what the service is, okay? Whether it's the guy that I go to the gym with and he's a coach, if I don't believe he's doing a great job, I'm not gonna refer him to people that are meaningful to me.
Can I just add to that quickly? That a lot of, well, okay, assuming I need it. When a client is, or a prospective prospect is being spoken to, they need to understand the reasons as well. And a lot of times you could have all the greatest reasons in the world when you're, in essence, you're selling Will Stewards by providing a solution to your client. That sometimes is not good enough, no matter how well the value proposition is or the reason is. So many people are just adverse to change, and that's just the way it is. So sometimes it takes more than just one conversation. You might have to have that conversation this year, maybe next year, maybe the year after. Eventually there might be a point where they're more serious about considering that change. I will tell you though, that in times like we're in today, where economic circumstances are more challenged, portfolio performances maybe not as what people like, their cost of living and they have other financial and other challenges. Long-standing relationships that they've had in the past, and most of your clients will have them with insurance brokers, portfolio investments, advisors, lawyers, accountants, who name it. Those don't tend to be as valued. People are more inclined to switch in situations where there's economic distress, because those long-standing relationships that you have with Jack or Jane that's taking you out to lunch every year for 20 years doesn't help you tomorrow. So in those situations, you're more likely to make the switch than if everything's going swimmingly with some of these people, even though there's a clear reason why they should change.
Did you have a question for Richard?
Oh, for Richard? Yeah, I do have a question for Richard.
Bruno has a question for Richard.
Okay.
Richard, when you were saying about being a senior debt or wanting a senior debt position, is if the company has a operating line of credit with a bank or some term debt, how do you fit into that situation? Because typically they're still going to need a line of credit.
So they'll be the senior. So again, if a bank's lending to a business and they need additional funding for some other reason, they can't get it from the bank, we'll typically look at it. And, I mean, it's
so you'll come right behind the bank then?
We'll come right behind it. Yeah.
Okay, because that was a question I had during your presentation.
Yeah.
And the other question I have, sort of, it's not a fair question, but because of those examples I gave where portfolio stewards can do things literally within weeks, sometimes, if not days.
Right.
What's typically the turnaround time when you get a prospect and you have all the information that you require to make an assessment?
Yeah, very, very good question. So, and again, it's about getting all the information. So it's all over the place. As I described that cryptocurrency deal. So usually when the loan origination team gets a deal, we can talk it through. Once we get sort of the financial statements, and then we can determine that they can service the debt and that there's assets there that are unencumbered that we could potentially lend against, we can make a quick determination to say we would like to advance this and move forward, and we can do that within a couple of days. But then, once we have to dig into actually getting the asset appraised independently. A lot of the times the businesses will give us their own appraisal. If we do know the appraisal group and we have confidence in them, then we'll certainly use that. So that reduces the time as well. There's a whole bunch of different factors like that. So I would say typical request for money, and again, these are typically smaller loans, sort of like our wheelhouse is sort of like from $3 to $10 million would be sort of our average range on what we see. We can typically turn those around in sort of like anywhere between, say, 4 to 8 weeks, but we've gone way faster and we've gone way slower. That other deal that I described to you about the regulatory capital, we did it over the course of a weekend. That was easy. because the asset was very apparent and they were willing to pledge their whole business against the loan that we were providing, just because it was regulatory capital, so it was an easy one.
Well,
But then again, like a lot of the times, the proprietors that own the businesses, and let me just finish this one point real quick, they, they're operating their business. So a lot of the times they do need money, but at the same time they're operating, and it's hard for them to actually deal with all the, the back and forth that we need and signing of documents and legal. So that's when you kind of get up into sort of that 2-month range. So it just depends.
Well, currently, I'm working on a situation with one of the large, I'll say the big 5 banks. You can figure out which one I said because I added one to it. They have literally 4 levels of credit approval.
Right.
They went through 3 levels. The 4th one, they said no. Not because they didn't say no. They said they didn't like it because the guy was too young and he didn't have enough experience, even though this was all known 6-8 months before.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, then you had to restructure the deal and cost professional fees, time, money, rising interest rates where you're going. So it wasn't a good situation.
Yeah.
So that's why I ask what the turnaround time is, because obviously I don't think I'll be involved with going to that bank again.
Good here. I'll give you my card.
So last question for Paul. What do your clients tell you are the biggest benefits they receive by working with a holistic wealth management firm?
I don't think for the most part they're coming out and saying, that's what it is. It really comes out of, it's really peace of mind. So do people use those exact words? Probably not. But what I do know is that there's sort of 3 things that I think good financial advice provides. A sounding board to make sure they make the right decision on key financial issues. The idea that there is some tangible payback in actually doing things better. So they're going to do better by paying less tax, having a diversified portfolio as an example. And then the last one is this broad thing is, and overall I feel more secure, have peace of mind. So, I don't think that anybody really articulates it that way. But I tell you, the lady who's in Aspen right now, I asked her if she wanted to meet before she went to Aspen. She said, no way, I'm not going to let this get in the way of a good time.